There is always this asking for representation in the in political system as well as in other decision making process, and this is something which is much celebrated in India, and it is seen as something which is important around the world. So for example, you look if people want a representation of women in the parliament, people want representation of women in the decision making bodies, in the commissions, and representation of not only women but let's say minorities, tribals, and there is in many cases there is specific posts of reservations, such as there are many laws in which it says that this particular post should only be held by women, and this particular post should only be held by, let's say, a minority person with who is belonging from minority community, or this particular position should be only held by a tribal. uh, then there are laws which says that this for example, examples could be, for example, in women sexual harassment laws that are present in India. In many of the commissions, it is very much necessary that women should be the head of the commission, and there should be at least one third of the members in that commission should be women, something of that sort. So the if especially at a sexual harassment at workplace, so if you are a registered company, you have to comply with something of that sort of a law. There is always one of the best examples that one could give of this kind of representation is with regard to in Lebanon what happened, or I don't know if it happens right now, but yeah, many years before it used to, at least, that a Maronite Catholic always would be a president, and a Muslim would always be a prime minister. A prime minister would always be a Muslim, and president would always be a Maronite Catholic. Now, this is one thing. Then you come across the reservation for 30 percentage of reservation for 30 percentage of women in the legislative or decision making bodies comes from the fact that you require proper representation of women in these decision making bodies. um, all these things comes from a fact that if I do not belong to a identity, then perhaps I cannot care about that identity, or I cannot work for the welfare of that identity. I cannot understand the problems of that identity, so on and so forth. I won't be that. I would be working for my own welfare and welfare of my identity, which is different from the identity of the group which I'm assigned to work for. So for example, let's say if I'm a man, and if I'm given a job for women empowerment in a particular ministry, a ministry of women and child care, etc., and if I'm a man, I would work for the development of men and not for the development of women. If I am, let's say, I follow a religion which happens to be majority in my country, and at the same time I'm assigned the work of minority affairs. I'm a minority affairs minister, working for the welfare of the minorities in my community, in my country. Then there is this notion that perhaps I won't be working for a minority community. I would be working for my own religion and people of my own religion, which is the majority religion. Now, is there any fact to it? First of all, uh, there is a idea, a strong idea, and there is a strong basis of the fact that in many cases then there can be a conflict of identities, right? uh, for example, let's say in the case of I'm following a majority community. I'm from a majority community. Let's say I'm in a Hindu majority country. I am a Hindu, and I have to work for the welfare of Muslims. There could be sometimes that my personal religion would clash with my there could be, one cannot underestimate that. Similarly, if we look at, let's say, something like indigenous population in many countries, tribal population in many countries, who don't have the concept of private properties and something like that, they collectively own whatever they own in many cases. So example, if I'm a tribal and then there is a not if example, I'm given a work for a tribal person, a tribal ministry, I'm a head of a tribal ministry, and then there is a mining company which has come for encroaching the land of the tribals. Then perhaps, if I'm not a tribal, then I might not work that efficiently or that effectively, or whatever be the scenario. I may not work as a tribal would have worked, because his identity is also in the question, comes to question. Uh, in my opinion, there is some fact in it, but at the same time, one needs to understand that everyone who for empathizes and has knowledge of things, of how to do it, can do it. In other words, if I'm a man and if I empathize for the care for women, if I want that rape should decrease in our country, if I want that women should work in places and welfare of women should be there, then it doesn't matter whether I am a man or whether I am a woman. I can use my authority, whatever authority I have, as a chief minister or as a minister of minority, is a women's affairs or women and child care affair, and I could use my knowledge, I could use my skill, I could use my leadership, decision making skills, and all those skills which I have, and I could put it for the welfare of women. So just because I am a man, it's not that I cannot work for the welfare of women. And I also deny the fact that just because I am a man, I may not work or I may not know the concerns of women that effectively as a woman may. That comes from that comes from a very theoretical understanding. It doesn't come from a very practical understanding, because in practice, the woman or the man doesn't go to the grassroots level and doesn't research, right? Doesn't go to the grassroots level and doesn't research, and what the problems generally are. They are busy, especially in politics, they are busy canvassing, they are busy doing all those stuff. They don't really care about, and they don't in many aspects they don't really actually have to care about all these aspects. Otherwise, for example, if Ministry of Defense should always go to a army man, because who can, you could argue that who could understand, who could basically know better about the defense sector than a ex-army man or an army man. So that is not the issue. We have many technical staff for this, for giving the knowledge which a normal an ordinary minister in the government would not have, right? You don't have to be an F1 driver to be to be a transport minister, and there are people who know things, and these ministers, whatever decision they take, they have to consult with the people who provide this information and provide this research. For example, a woman, let's say if I'm a man, and if let's say if there is a woman working for the women's affairs, but she is grown she is grown in a very urban lifestyle, and she hasn't faced problems what rural problems women face in the society, and she was educated abroad, she doesn't know what an Indian woman goes through it, etc. And because of the identity that she carries as a woman, she is brought to, she is basically getting the position of a a woman's minister, or woman and childcare minister. Now if you look at this point, at this time, she doesn't know anything. Just because she's a woman doesn't mean that she knows or she understands the problems of women better than men. Perhaps the men has seen let's say woman growing up in the growing up in his neighborhood. He was an Indian from rural background, so he has seen how what are the problems that women face in rural areas, etc. So in general, what I would say is this, that both the points do agree. I mean, it's not absolutely necessary that a man cannot look after the welfare of women, or look after the ministry which whose mandate is for the welfare of women. At the same time, in different issues, and this is for all cases, there might be circumstances where your identity clash with the identity of the person who is of the identity of the person who is basically clash with the identity of the person which is different from the identity of the work that is provided to you. So for example, if you are a tribal minister and you yourself do not belong to a tribal community, perhaps both these identities would conflict. But having said that, that may not always be the rule. And if we take it as a rule, and we make a rule that only a tribal minister, only a tribal person could become a minister for tribal affairs, then perhaps we are foregoing the decision making capability, the leadership capability, or other capabilities that a person has, which he could have used. Agreed that he would not be a tribal, but he has worked in tribal areas. He was, let's say, earlier for tribal affair, working in Indian Forest Service, and he has seen how tribals are exploited, etc. Or many factors could be there. He might have experience in that field, or he might not have experience in that field. He knows how to talk to he knows how to solve the Naxal problem, for that matter, or whatever may be the case. Or in general, he is a person, whichever field you give to that person, he knows how to talk to the researchers in that field and basically take the decision, right? He knows how to basically form a policy and take the decision. If that is the case, then he doesn't need to be a tribal, right? So rather than making a law, what it should be left to the ministers of how they want to basically appoint different ministry to different people, rather than making a law. And because, for example, if you make such a law, then perhaps we may if I have to choose, if I'm let's say a prime minister and I have to choose between a person who knows a lot about women and who has worked in that field, but he is a man, and a woman who hasn't worked in this field, but she is a woman, I would have to choose woman, right? At the same time, if it was left to my discretion, then perhaps I would have chosen I would have chosen men, and it would have worked for the betterment of women in the ministry of women in at the end of the day. So that is the reason why I guess it should be left to the discretion of the person, of the ministry, of the party, or of the government, or any decision making body which particular. And this particular fact that only a woman can understand as much as and a man can never understand what a woman goes through, this is actually wrong, right? I don't think so. If you could through explanation and through research and through empathy, you could basically do what a man could work as better, as much as a woman could work for the welfare of women in general. If you look at and it depends upon, like, there are some governments which follow the criteria. For example, I guess the previous government, in the sense that 2014 government, which was formed in 2014, the minority affairs minister hailed from a minority background. The person who cared for the woman and child, development, was a woman. So they followed that identity. Doesn't mean that if they would not have followed that, a woman should only be a woman, working for the ministry of women. If they would not have followed that trend, results would have been something which is, which would have been different, or which would have been bad. It doesn't go like that.